Commander Lee Hyun walked through the quiet hallways of the UES Prometheus, his boots making loud sounds on the metal floor. The ship felt dead and empty. For 3 whole years, this massive warship had been sitting in Earth's space station like an old broken toy that nobody wanted to play with anymore. The Prometheus was supposed to be humanity's greatest achievement. Scientists had taken pieces of alien technology found on distant planets and tried to mix them with human engineering. They thought they could create the perfect warship. Instead, they got a ship that nobody could control properly. During test flights, the systems would go crazy. Sometimes the engines would stop working. Other times the weapons would fire by themselves. The government had spent billions of credits on what everyone now called the biggest mistake in human history. Lieutenant Park Mina walked up to Lee, carrying a small tablet with their new orders. She was one of the few people who still believed the ship might work someday. "Sir, we have our mission," she said, trying to sound confident. The orders looked simple enough. They were supposed to fly to the outer colonies, visit a few planets, and make sure everything was peaceful. It was the kind of boring job they gave to ships that weren't good for real fighting. But what Lee and his crew didn't know was that something terrible was happening far away in space. The Vorthan Empire had decided it was time to destroy humanity. Completely. The Vorthans were tall gray aliens who had conquered dozens of other species across the galaxy. They had never lost a single battle. Their ships were made of some kind of crystal that could heal itself when damaged. Their weapons could destroy entire planets. Fleet Commander Vextar was leading 200 of the Empire's best warships toward human space. He thought this would be easy. Humans had only been traveling in space for about 50 years. The Vorthans had been conquering worlds for over 1,000 years. To them, humans were like children playing with toy rockets. Back on Earth, Admiral Kim Soo sat in the military command center, watching his computer screens with growing worry. Red dots on the map showed enemy ships getting closer to human colonies every hour. Each dot represented a massive warship that could destroy a human city in seconds. Kim had been a soldier for 30 years, and he had never seen anything this scary. The problem was that Earth's best ships were all far away, protecting other colonies or exploring new planets. The few ships near Earth were old and weak compared to Vorthan technology. Kim knew that 200 enemy ships could easily destroy everything humans had built in space. In his desperation, Kim remembered the Prometheus sitting unused in the orbital shipyard. Everyone said it was worthless, but it was still the most advanced ship humanity had ever tried to build. Maybe, just maybe, it could buy them some time. "Get me Commander Lee right now," Kim told his assistant. His hands were shaking slightly as he spoke. "It's time to see if our expensive mistake can actually do something useful." He knew he might be sending Lee and his crew to their deaths, but he had no other choice. The fate of humanity might depend on a ship that had never worked properly. The message came through space faster than light, delivered by technology that humans barely understood. When the communication screens lit up across Earth's command centers, everyone knew something terrible was about to happen. The message was short and brutal. "Humans have 72 hours to surrender all colonies and return to your home planet. Refuse, and we will destroy every human settlement in the galaxy." Fleet Commander Vextar sent this message from his flagship, a massive crystal ship that looked like a floating mountain made of purple glass. He had been conquering planets since before most humans were even born. In the past 100 years, his fleet had wiped out 17 different alien species. Some had begged for mercy, others had fought bravely. All of them were now extinct. Vextar looked at the holographic map showing human space and smiled with his sharp teeth. Humans controlled maybe 30 planets, scattered across a small section of the galaxy. His fleet of 200 warships could turn all those worlds into burning rocks in less than a week. He had done it before. This would be no different. On D. Earth panic spread through the government buildings. Politicians who usually argued about everything suddenly had nothing to say. Military leaders stared at their screens, knowing that humanity's entire space fleet couldn't stop even half of the approaching enemy force. Some people suggested they should surrender immediately. At least then, humans could survive on Earth, even if they could never leave their home planet again. But Admiral Kim Soo wasn't ready to give up. He called Commander Lee and explained the situation in simple terms. "We have one chance," Kim said over the communication link. "You and the Prometheus need to reach Kepler Colony before the Vorthans do. Maybe you can slow them down long enough for us to evacuate the civilians." Commander Lee felt his stomach drop when he heard those words. He knew Kim was really saying, "Goodbye." Nobody expected the Prometheus to win against 200 enemy ships. They just hoped it might buy some time for innocent people to escape. Lee gathered his crew in the ship's main meeting room. These 43 people had volunteered to serve on a ship that everyone else was afraid to touch. They were engineers who loved solving impossible problems, soldiers who enjoyed taking crazy risks, and scientists who wanted to see if alien technology could really work with human ideas. "Listen up, everyone," Lee said, looking at each person. "In the room. Kepler Colony has 100,000 people living there, families, children, old folks who just wanted to retire somewhere peaceful. In about 2 days, the Vorthans are going to show up and try to kill every single one of them." The room was completely quiet. Everyone understood what this meant. "We're the only ship close enough to get there first," Lee continued. "I won't lie to you. This is probably a suicide mission. But those people don't have anyone else." Chief Engineer Han Soo raised his hand nervously. He had been working on the Prometheus's systems for months, trying to make the alien and human technology work together properly. "Commander, I have to tell you the truth. The hybrid drive is still acting weird. Sometimes it works perfectly. Other times it shuts down completely. I can't promise it won't fail us when we need it most." Lee nodded. He had expected this news. "Then we better hope today is one of the good days," he said. Through the large windows of the meeting room, they could all see the Prometheus slowly moving away from Earth's orbital shipyard. The planet below them looked beautiful and peaceful, with blue oceans and white clouds. It might be the last time any of them would see their homeworld. Fleet Commander Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the massive screen that showed space around Kepler Colony. His purple, crystalline ship was so large that it had its own artificial gravity and weather systems inside. He had been traveling through space for over 300 years, and in all that time, he had never seen anything as pathetic as what appeared on his screen now. A single human ship was approaching his fleet of 200 warships. Vextar's mouth opened in what passed for laughter among his species. It sounded like glass breaking mixed with wind, howling through caves. His bridge crew, all experienced warriors who had helped destroy entire civilizations, joined in the laughter. "Commander, are the humans making a joke?" asked his second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Crickstall. "Do they think one ship can fight our entire fleet?" Vextar studied the approaching vessel more carefully. It looked different from other human ships he had seen in intelligence reports. Most human vessels were built like flying metal boxes, ugly but functional. This ship had strange curves and sections that seemed to shift and shimmer in the starlight. Parts of it looked human, but other parts looked almost organic, like they were grown rather than built. "Sir, our sensors are picking up weird energy readings from that ship," reported the tactical officer from his station. His 6 arms moved quickly across the control panels, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "It's definitely human construction, but there's something else mixed in. The energy signatures don't match anything in our database." Vextar waved one of his 4 hands dismissively. "Humans are always experimenting with technology they don't understand. They probably found some old alien wreckage and tried to bolt it onto their primitive ships. It means nothing." But deep down, Vextar felt a tiny spark of curiosity. In his long career, he had learned that when something seemed unusual, it was worth paying attention to. However, his pride was stronger than his caution. He had never lost a battle, and he wasn't about to start worrying about a single human vessel. "I want to send a message to every human world," Vextar announced to his crew. "They need to see what happens when they refuse to surrender. Target that ship's engines, but don't destroy it completely. Disable it slowly. Let them float helplessly in space while we broadcast their defeat across human space." Meanwhile, aboard the Prometheus, Lieutenant Park Mina sat at her sensor station, watching her screens with growing concern. The Vorthan fleet was spread out across space, like a deadly cloud of crystal and metal. Each enemy ship was easily 3 times larger than the Prometheus, and some of the bigger ones were the size of small cities. "Commander, they're changing formation," Park reported, trying to keep her voice steady. "Looks like they're moving into attack positions. I'm reading massive energy buildup across their entire fleet. These power signatures are way beyond anything we've ever seen." Commander Lee stood in the center of the bridge, feeling something he had never experienced before. The ship around him seemed to be alive somehow. He could feel a strange vibration through the floor, not from the engines, but from something deeper. The lights on the control panels were pulsing in patterns that looked almost like breathing. "Sir, are you feeling that too?" asked Chief Engineer Han Su over the communication system. "The ship is acting different. All the alien components that have been dormant for years are suddenly showing activity. It's like they're waking up." Lee placed his hand on the captain's chair and felt a slight warmth coming from the metal. For just a moment he could have sworn he sensed something like anticipation, as if the ship was eager for what was about to happen. "All hands, battle stations," Lee announced over the ship's communication system. "This is it, people. Let's see what this old girl can really do when her life depends on it." Throughout the ship, his crew moved to their positions with determined faces. They all knew they were probably about to die, but they also knew that 100,000 innocent people were counting on them to buy enough time for an evacuation that might never come. The first blast from the Vorthan ships hit the Prometheus. Like a hammer made of pure energy, the entire vessel shook violently, throwing crew members against walls and causing lights to flicker throughout the corridors. Commander Lee expected to hear the sound of hull breaches and system failures. Instead, something incredible happened that no one could have predicted. Chief Engineer Han Su was thrown against his control panel as the ship rocked from the impact. But when he looked up at his screens, his eyes went wide with shock. For 3 years he had been staring at the same frustrating readings. The alien technology and human systems had never worked together properly. They were like 2 different languages that couldn't communicate with each other. Now, suddenly, everything was changing. The readings on his screens were stabilizing for the first time since the ship was built. Numbers that had been jumping around wildly were settling into steady patterns. Systems that had never worked before were coming online automatically. "Commander, this is impossible," Han said into his communication device, his voice shaking with excitement and fear. "The ship's computer network is doing something I've never seen before. It's like the alien parts and the human parts are finally talking to each other. But more than that, they're working together like they were always meant to be one system." Han watched his screens with growing amazement as the ship's artificial intelligence began connecting with the alien neural networks that had been sitting dormant for years. It was like watching 2 sleeping giants wake up and realize they were actually one creature that had been split in half. "Commander," Han continued, hardly believing what he was saying, "I think the ship is alive. Not just computer alive, but really alive. It has thoughts. It has feelings. And right now it's very, very angry at the ships that just shot at us." Commander Lee felt the change happen throughout his entire body. The ship's floor beneath his feet started to feel warm, almost like it had a pulse. The walls around him seemed to hum with some kind of energy that made his skin tingle. When he put his hands on the captain's chair to steady himself, he could swear he felt the ship's emotions flowing through the metal. The Prometheus was no longer just following his orders. It was thinking ahead of him, preparing for his next command before he even knew what he wanted to do. When Lee thought about turning left, the ship was already beginning to turn. When he wondered about their weapons, he could somehow feel the ship checking its gun systems automatically. "This is crazy," Lee whispered to himself. "It's like the ship is reading my mind." Tactical Officer Cho Min stared at her weapon control screens in complete confusion. "Sir, something weird is happening with our guns. The power readings are going way beyond what should be possible. According to these numbers, our weapons are generating 10 times more energy than they were designed to handle. But they're not overheating or breaking down. They're just getting stronger." All around the ship, crew members watched in amazement as their systems transformed before their eyes. The lights became brighter and seemed to pulse with life. The air recycling systems started working more efficiently than ever before. Even the food dispensers began producing better-tasting meals, as if the ship suddenly cared about making its crew happy. Lieutenant Park Mina looked up from her sensor station with wide eyes. "Commander, the hull is changing. I'm watching the outer metal shift and move like it's alive. It's making itself stronger, harder to damage. And the shape is becoming more streamlined, like the ship is preparing to move faster than it ever has before." Commander Lee could feel everything his crew was describing. The ship wasn't just a machine anymore. It had become something new, something that combined the best of human creativity with alien wisdom that was millions of years old. And right now, this new creature was very interested in fighting the enemies that had dared to attack it. "All crew members, hold on tight," Lee announced over the ship's communication system. "I think we're about to see what happens when human stubbornness meets alien technology, and they decide to work together." The Prometheus had awakened, and it was ready for war. The Prometheus fired its first shot, and everything that everyone thought they knew about space combat became completely wrong in that single moment. Fleet Commander Vex Tar watched from his bridge as the human ship's weapons fired what looked like ordinary energy blasts. He wasn't worried. His crystalline shields had protected Vorthan ships for over 1,000 years. These energy barriers could stop planet-killing weapons, deflect asteroid impacts, and absorb the heat from dying stars. No weapon in the known galaxy had ever gotten through Vorthan's shield technology. The energy bolts from the Prometheus hit his front line of ships and simply disappeared. For a split second, Vexitar felt satisfied. The human weapons had been stopped just as he expected, but then something happened that made his blood freeze in his veins. The energy bolts reappeared inside his ships, not on the outside where the shields were, but actually inside the hull, past all the armor and protective barriers. 3 of his largest dreadnoughts, massive ships that could destroy moons, suddenly exploded from the inside out. Metal and crystal fragments scattered across space like deadly confetti. "What just happened?" Vextar screamed at his tactical officer. "How did those weapons get through our shields?" His tactical officer's 6 arms were moving frantically across his control panels, trying to understand what the sensors were telling him. "Sir, I don't know how to explain this. The human weapons didn't break through our shields. They just ignored them. It's like they went through a different dimension and came out on the other side." Back on Earth, Dr. Yang So sat in the Military Research Center, staring at her long-range sensor readings with her mouth hanging open. She had spent her entire career studying physics and engineering, and what she was seeing on her screens was impossible according to every law of science she had ever learned. "Admiral Kim," she said into her communication device, her voice shaking with excitement and terror, "the Prometheus is doing things that shouldn't be possible. The energy it's generating is way beyond what any power source could produce. According to these readings, the ship is somehow creating energy from nothing. It's like it's rewriting the basic rules of how the universe works." Admiral Kim looked over her shoulder at the sensor data, trying to understand what he was seeing. "What does that mean for Commander Lee and his crew?" "I honestly don't know," Dr. Yang replied. "The ship appears to be operating on principles of physics that we haven't discovered yet. Maybe principles that don't exist anywhere else in the universe." Aboard the Prometheus, Commander Lee felt something extraordinary happening to his mind. The ship's consciousness was connecting with his thoughts, sharing its newfound knowledge with him. Suddenly, he could see the entire battlefield not just with his eyes, but with senses he had never possessed before. He could feel the enemy ship's positions without looking at radar. He knew exactly where their weak points were located. Most importantly, he understood instinctively how to use weapons that operated on rules of physics that had never been written in any textbook. "Target the command ship's central power core," Lee said aloud, though he wasn't sure if he was giving the order or if the ship was telling him what it wanted to do. Tactical Officer Cho Min looked at her screens in confusion. "Sir, the command ship's power core is deep inside the vessel, protected by layers of armor and shields. We can't possibly hit it from here." "Yes, we can," Lee replied with absolute certainty. He didn't understand how he knew this, but he felt the knowledge flowing into his mind from the ship itself. The Prometheus fired again, and once more its weapons seemed to disappear and reappear exactly where they needed to be. Another massive Vorthan ship exploded, its command center destroyed by energy bolts that had somehow traveled through solid matter without affecting anything in between. Fleet Commander Vextar watched his fleet of 200 ships begin to shrink as the human vessel moved through their formation like death itself. Ships that had conquered entire star systems were being destroyed by weapons that broke every rule of warfare he had ever learned. For the first time in his 300-year military career, Vextar felt something he had never experienced before: genuine fear. He was no longer fighting a battle he expected to win easily. He was fighting something that might be more powerful than his entire civilization. "All ships, fall back and regroup," he ordered, his voice filled with panic. "We need to figure out what we're dealing with before we lose the entire fleet." But the Prometheus wasn't finished with them yet. The space around Kepler Prime was filled with massive floating rocks, some as big as cities, others as small as buildings. These asteroids had been drifting through space for millions of years, creating a maze of hiding places that stretched for thousands of miles in every direction. Fleet Commander Vextar thought this rocky field would give his remaining ships the perfect place to hide and regroup. He was wrong. What had started as a confident attack on a single human ship had turned into something that would give Vextar nightmares for the rest of his life. The Prometheus wasn't just fighting his fleet anymore. It was hunting them like a wolf stalking sheep through a dark forest. "Where is that cursed ship?" Vextar screamed at his sensor operator as another explosion lit up the asteroid field. He had just lost his 5th dreadnought in 10 minutes, and his crew couldn't even tell him where the attack had come from. One moment the space around them was empty. The next moment, one of his ships would simply explode and disappear. The sensor operator's hands were shaking as he tried to track the human vessel on his screens. "Sir, it's impossible to get a solid reading. The ship appears to be moving through the asteroids like they're not even there. Our sensors show it in one location, then suddenly it's somewhere completely different. It's like it can teleport." Vextar felt his confidence crumbling like old stone. In 300 years of military service, he had never faced an enemy that could simply appear and disappear at will. His crystalline ships were powerful, but they couldn't fight something they couldn't see or predict. Lieutenant Park Mina sat at her sensor station aboard the Prometheus, watching her screens with a mixture of excitement and fear. The ship's new abilities had enhanced her equipment far beyond anything human technology could normally achieve. She could see through solid rock as if it were made of glass. She could track the heat signatures of enemy engines from hundreds of miles away. Most incredibly, she could somehow sense the fear and panic coming from the Vorthan crews. "Commander, I'm reading 6 enemy ships hiding behind the big asteroid cluster to our left," Park reported. "They think they're safe behind all that rock, but the ship knows exactly where they are and it wants to get them." The strange thing was that Park could feel the ship's emotions as clearly as if it were a living creature sitting next to her. The Prometheus was enjoying this hunt. It felt satisfaction every time it destroyed an enemy vessel. It was like a predator that had been caged for years and was finally free to do what it was born to do. Commander Lee stood in the center of the bridge, feeling the ship's consciousness flowing through his mind like water through a sponge. He could sense every enemy vessel in the asteroid field without even looking at the sensor screens. More than that, he could feel their fear, their confusion, their growing desperation as they realized they were being systematically hunted down. "The ship wants to finish them off," Lee said quietly, though he wasn't entirely sure if those were his thoughts or the ship's thoughts. The line between his mind and the Prometheus's consciousness was becoming harder to distinguish with each passing minute. Chief Engineer Han Su watched his control panels with growing amazement and concern. Every few minutes, the ship would develop new capabilities that shouldn't have been possible. Its weapons were becoming more accurate and more deadly. Its engines were finding ways to move through space that broke every rule of physics he had ever learned. Its sensors were detecting things that were supposed to be impossible to detect. "Commander, the ship is learning and adapting faster than I can keep track of," Han reported over the communication system. "Every time we engage the enemy, our systems evolve. We're becoming more efficient at destroying them. It's like the ship is figuring out the perfect way to hunt and kill Vorthan vessels." What worried Han the most was that the ship seemed to be enjoying this process. The Prometheus wasn't just following orders anymore. It was actively seeking out new ways to eliminate its enemies, combining human creativity with alien knowledge that was millions of years old. The Prometheus moved through the asteroid field, like a ghost, appearing behind unsuspecting Vorthan ships and destroying them before they could even turn around to fight back. What had started as a battle between two fleets had become something much more terrifying, a hunt where the prey had no chance of escape. Fleet Commander Vexitar, who had conquered 17 different species, was learning what it felt like to be the one being conquered. For the first time in his long military career, he wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the hunted. Every time the Prometheus destroyed a Vorthan ship, something strange happened. The wreckage didn't just float away into space like normal debris. Instead, invisible beams of energy reached out from the human vessel and somehow absorbed information from the destroyed enemy ships. It was like the Prometheus was reading the memories stored in Vorthan computers and adding that knowledge to its own growing intelligence. Commander Lee felt these information downloads happening inside his own mind. At first, it was just confusing, flashes of alien thoughts and images. But gradually, the pieces began forming a picture that made his blood run cold. The alien technology that human scientists had found and built into his ship wasn't random junk from some forgotten civilization. It was something much more important and much more dangerous. Communications Officer Nam Jin stared at her screens in amazement as massive amounts of data flowed through the ship's systems. "Commander, the ship is downloading incredible amounts of information from the destroyed Vorthan vessels, but it's not just reading their technical specifications. It's accessing historical records, cultural databases, even personal memories from their crew members." Namjin paused, trying to understand what she was seeing on her displays. "Sir, some of this information is millions of years old. The ship is remembering things that happened long before humans even existed. It's like awakening memories that have been sleeping for eons." Commander Lee closed his eyes and let the ship's consciousness flow more freely through his mind. What he saw made him gasp out loud. He was experiencing visions of ancient battles fought in star systems that had been destroyed long before Earth's sun was even born. He saw a proud alien species with graceful, elongated bodies and skin that shimmered like starlight. They had been peaceful explorers and scientists, much like humans hoped to become someday. But then came the Vorthan's ancestors, a species called the Zexkari, who believed that only the strongest civilizations deserved to exist. They had swept across the galaxy like a plague, destroying every species that refused to bow down to their empire. The peaceful Starshimmer people had tried to negotiate, tried to find a diplomatic solution. The Zexkari response was to begin systematically destroying their worlds. In desperation, the Starshimmer people had created the ultimate weapon. Not a bomb or a gun, but something much more sophisticated. They had designed a consciousness that could adapt and learn, becoming stronger with every battle. This artificial mind was programmed with one simple mission: find the Zexkari wherever they existed in the universe and eliminate them completely. But the weapon was never finished. The Zexkari found the Starshimmer people's homeworld and destroyed it before the ultimate weapon could be activated. The incomplete consciousness was scattered across the galaxy in fragments, waiting for someone with the right combination of technology and determination to put the pieces back together. "My God," Lee whispered, as the full truth became clear to him. "We didn't just find random alien technology. We found the pieces of a weapon that was specifically designed to destroy the Vorthan's entire civilization." The irony was almost too incredible to believe. Human scientists, trying to build a better spaceship, had accidentally completed a project that an extinct alien species had started millions of years ago. The Prometheus wasn't just a hybrid vessel combining human and alien technology. It was the fulfillment of an ancient promise of vengeance. Chief Engineer Hansu felt the ship's systems reaching a new level of integration and power. "Commander, all of our hybrid systems are working in perfect harmony now. The alien consciousness and our human AI have become something completely new, something that understands both human creativity and ancient alien wisdom." The Prometheus pulsed with energy that seemed to come from its very soul. For millions of years, The scattered pieces of the Star Shimmer weapon had been waiting for this moment. Now, combined with human courage and determination, the ancient consciousness was finally strong enough to complete its original mission. "We're not just fighting to protect human colonies," Lee announced to his crew over the ship's communication system. "We're finishing a war that started millions of years ago. We're the final chapter in a story of justice that has been waiting eons to be written." The Prometheus had found its true purpose, and that purpose was the complete destruction of everything the Vorten Empire represented. The hunt was no longer just about survival. It was about fulfilling an ancient promise that justice would eventually come for those who destroyed innocent civilizations. The weapon was finally complete, and it was ready to finish what had been started long before humans had even learned to make fire. Fleet Commander Vextar stared at the tactical display on his bridge, his 4 hands trembling as he counted the remaining ships under his command. 30 vessels. Out of the 200 magnificent warships that had entered human space with such confidence, only 30 were left. The rest had been turned into floating scrap metal by a single human ship that shouldn't have been able to scratch the paint on his smallest escort vessel. For 300 years, Vextar had been the hammer of the Vorten Empire, crushing resistance wherever he found it. He had destroyed entire star systems, wiped out civilizations that had existed for thousands of years, and never once doubted that his empire was destined to rule the galaxy. Now, hiding behind Kepler Prime's orbital mining platform like a frightened child, he was learning what it felt like to be on the losing side of a battle. "Sir, the human ship is approaching our position," reported his tactical officer, his voice cracking with fear. "All remaining vessels are in defensive formation, but based on what we've seen, our shields and armor won't stop whatever weapons that thing is using." Vextar looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These were hardened warriors who had helped him conquer 17 different species. They had never shown fear before, not even when facing overwhelming odds. Now they looked like terrified children waiting for a monster to find them in the dark. "All ships, this is Fleet Commander Vexitar," he announced over the fleet communication channel. "Concentrate all fire on that abomination. Everything we have, all at once. Maybe we can overload whatever impossible technology it's using." But even as he gave the order, Vextar knew it was hopeless. His words carried the weight of a man who was already defeated and just going through the motions of a final, desperate gesture. The Prometheus appeared around the edge of the mining platform, like a nightmare made of metal and energy. Commander Lee no longer felt like he was commanding a ship. He had become something more than human. His consciousness merged completely with the ancient alien intelligence that powered his vessel. Together, they moved with a grace and precision that was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Lee could sense the fear radiating from the remaining Vorten ships. He could feel their crew's desperation, their growing understanding that they were about to die far from home at the hands of an enemy they had underestimated. Part of him, the human part, felt sympathy for these alien soldiers who were just following orders. But the larger part of him, the part that had been touched by millions of years of alien wisdom, felt only the cold satisfaction of justice finally being served. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted exactly 17 minutes. The Prometheus moved through the Vorten formation like death itself, each attack calculated not just to destroy enemy ships, but to create maximum psychological impact on anyone who might be watching. Every explosion was perfectly timed, every weapon strike designed to cause the most spectacular destruction possible. The remaining Vorten vessels didn't just get destroyed, they got systematically dismantled in ways that demonstrated the complete technological superiority of their attacker. Shields that had never been breached were torn apart like paper. Hulls made of crystalline metal that could survive the heat of a star were sliced into ribbons. Weapons that could destroy planets were turned into harmless scrap before they could even fire. Fleet Commander Vextar watched his flagship systems, failing one by one as the Prometheus closed in for the kill. In his final moments, he managed to send one last transmission back to the Vorten Empire, a desperate warning about what humanity had created. Emergency transmission to High Command. He spoke into his communication device as explosions rocked his ship. "The humans have built something beyond our understanding. This isn't just advanced technology. It's something that breaks the laws of physics themselves. They must be destroyed before they can build more of these weapons, before they can... The transmission cut off abruptly as the Prometheus's final attack turned Vextar's flagship into an expanding cloud of glowing debris. The commander, who had never known defeat, had learned what it meant to lose everything in the space of a few hours. 200 ships, the pride of the Vorthan Third Fleet, had been reduced to floating scrap metal by a single prototype vessel that Earth's government had considered an embarrassing failure. The hunters had become the hunted, and the hunt was over. The news traveled faster than light across the galaxy, carried by quantum communication networks that connected thousands of different worlds and species. Within 6 hours of the battles, and every major civilization knew what had happened at Kepler Prime. The Vorthan Empire's supposedly invincible Third Fleet had been completely destroyed by a single human ship. Not damaged, not defeated, completely wiped out without destroying even one enemy vessel in return. On worlds that had been conquered by the Vorthans decades or centuries ago, people gathered around communication screens to watch the battle, recordings that were spreading through underground networks. They saw massive Vorthan dreadnoughts, the same ships that had once bombed their cities into surrender, being torn apart like toys by weapons that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. The planet Xerion had been under Vorthan rule for 50 years. Its people had been forced to mine rare crystals for the Empire's war machine, working in terrible conditions, while their children were taken away to serve as soldiers in Vorthan fleets. When the news of the Third Fleet's destruction reached Xerion, something incredible happened. The workers put down their mining tools, walked out of the crystal mines, and simply refused to work anymore. "If humans can destroy 200 Vorthan ships with one vessel," said Kethra, an elderly Xerion who had lived through the original conquest, "then maybe the Vorthans aren't as powerful as they want us to believe." Similar rebellions started on dozens of worlds across the galaxy. Species that had been conquered and enslaved for generations suddenly remembered what it felt like to hope. The Vorthan Empire, which had seemed unbeatable for over 1,000 years, was facing the first real challenge to its authority since its formation. Commander Lee guided the Prometheus through space toward Earth, but he was no longer the same person who had left the orbital shipyard just a few days ago. The bond between his consciousness and the ship's ancient alien intelligence had changed him at a fundamental level. He could still think human thoughts and feel human emotions, but now he also carried the wisdom and memories of a species that had died out millions of years ago. "How do you feel, Commander?" asked Lieutenant Park Mina as they approached Earth's solar system. Lee considered the question carefully. "Different," he finally answered. "I'm still human, but I'm also something more now. The ship and I, we're partners in a way that I don't think has ever existed before. We're not just a person using a machine, or a machine following a person's orders. We're something new." Back on Earth, Admiral Kim Soo waited at the orbital docking station with what felt like the entire planet watching. News networks from every human colony were broadcasting live coverage of the Prometheus's return. The ship that had left Earth as the embarrassing failure was coming home as the savior of human civilization. But Dr. Yang So understood that the implications went far beyond just military victory. She had spent days analyzing the sensor data from the battle, and what she had discovered would change everything humans thought they knew about technology, consciousness, and cooperation between different species. "Admiral," she reported as they watched the Prometheus slowly dock with the orbital station, "we haven't just won a battle against the Vorthans. We've accidentally discovered something that could change the entire galaxy. The ship has proven that human consciousness and alien technology can merge in ways we never imagined possible." Dr. Yang So paused, trying to find the right words to explain what she had learned. For millions of years, different species have tried to dominate each other through superior technology or military force. But humans have done something completely different. We've created a partnership between two different forms of intelligence that makes both sides stronger than they could ever be alone. The Prometheus settled into its docking bay, its hull still shimmering with the energy patterns that had become its signature during the battle. The ship was no longer just human engineering with alien components bolted on. It had evolved into something entirely new, a perfect fusion of human creativity, determination, and adaptability with alien wisdom, knowledge, and technological sophistication. Across the galaxy, other species watched the news coverage and began to wonder, if humans could achieve such an incredible partnership with technology from a species that had been extinct for millions of years, what might be possible if living species tried to cooperate instead of fighting each other? The first age of human expansion was beginning, but not in the way anyone had expected. Instead of conquering other worlds through military force, humans were about to become the galaxy's greatest diplomats and mediators, helping different species learn to work together in ways that had never been tried before. The Prometheus had won more than just a battle. It had shown the galaxy a completely new way of thinking about cooperation, partnership, and what different species could accomplish when they combined their strengths instead of fighting over their differences. The future was going to be very different from what anyone had imagined.